So in terms of the most understood wrestlers ever, usually with these lists, I think we all have a tendency to go back in time. I want to talk about someone who is active right now. And let's try and get some understanding going, because it's a great opportunity, right? There's no point going back to someone from 84. That's gone now, and whatever the legacy is what the legacy is. But Solo Sikoa, ever since WrestleMania 40, sometimes irks me because I'm a weird person, has totally been a misunderstood wrestler, right? Everyone was like, oh man, he's like such a wuss, and he over-relies on Jacob for 2, and he can never win a match by himself. That's the point. The whole point was, even though he had anointed himself the tribal chief and he wanted people to acknowledge him, he knew deep down in his tum-tum and deep down in his tootsie toes he was not ready for that role. He was thrust into that role. He was just so mad at Roman, so he wanted to get his revenge. But again, internally, he was struggling with this. He had self-confidence issues. He probably had imposter syndrome. He was basically going through a mental health crisis. And maybe if we had let into that more, he would have been the greatest character of 2024. It's kind of like what Hangman Adam Page did in AEW a few years ago, which was brilliant. But it just drove me nuts when people are, oh, Solo Sikoa never wins a match properly. Not meant to win a match properly. That's why he brought in the crazy 2, Tama Tonga and Jacob for 2, because he knew he didn't have the goods, so he just tried to surround himself with people that could actually get him to where he wanted to go. And I'm actually talking about this before the tribal chief acknowledgement ceremony that Roman is having on the 27th of January Raw. I bet the Solo finally goes, okay, you're besting me, what else can I do? And Jacob and Tama then rip him to shreds. Like, that's not what we signed up for, because you can't contain them, which is why the original Bloodline didn't want them to bring WWE in the first place. But Solo, I actually think, was playing quite an in-depth and interesting character. We just threw it away, because he's like, oh man, he's getting buried. He was not getting buried. I think he was on every single SmackDown for around about 8 months. Sounds like a good career to me. So, I'm a big fan of Solo Sikoa. If I was going to acknowledge anybody, it would be him, which I know is a treacherous thing to say. But I think he was playing it with a little bit more nuance than people gave him credit for. And I could be completely wrong, and maybe I'm seeing what I want to see. The fact that I can even walk down this path to begin with kind of leads me to believe that there was meant to be a little bit more there. Also, he's tremendous. Like, he was a little bit, I won't say robotic, because I think that was the point of it all, but he was a little bit held back when he first took over this role. But by the time he was turning up on Raw going, I got tickets to see Jey Uso, and making a lot of funny, stupid TNA jokes with the Motor City Machine Guns, I was like, man, this Solo Sikoa is my guy. I'm actually intrigued to see, does he go back with Roman? Does he sort of walk his own path? Like, what does he do? I don't actually know. He does have that interest to him. I wouldn't necessarily say whatever his next steps are obvious. And sometimes with WWE characters, you can just tell, which is a good thing. It's also a good thing when you don't know. So basically, shout out to Solo Sikoa, who had an Oscar-worthy performance as a character, and nobody gave him the time of day.
Now, you're going to hear a lot of people on this video, quite rightly, who are far more knowledgeable than I am, talk about misunderstood wrestlers who were far better than you actually realise. I'm going to flip it on its head somewhat and say Shane McMahon is the most misunderstood wrestler of all time by WWE, because he's no good at anything. Like, he's good, I'll give him this, he's good at falling off stuff, getting chucked through stuff, and sweating so goddamn much. But like, we all have our differences when it comes to our favourite wrestlers and the reasons behind that. But you can take any of our favourite things, whether it be promos, whether it be in-ring ability, whether it be just, audience excitement. He's got none of that. Like, he had that moment where everyone was ecstatic to see him back just because he wasn't Stephanie McMahon or Vince McMahon. Outside of that, and yes, falling off stuff, which always used to piss me off, especially in the sort of latter days of Shane McMahon when he'd have the big WrestleMania match, because yeah, of course you can fall off stuff if you've got 6 months to recover from it and not working the house show the next night. That wound me up so much that it's like, well, why isn't Kevin Owens doing something like that? Because he's got to do like 200 dates in a year, mate, and he's not just the boss's son who just gets to handpick his opponents, or run through people in a Royal Rumble, beat up, I don't know, however you feel about him, beat up former UFC fighter Matt Riddle, and take Brock Lesnar to his limit as well. Shane McMahon, I was tempted to do Kane for this one, but then I remembered I slagged off Kane a while back and people got all upset in the comments. It's an entrance and a chokeslam, calm down, right? But at least he had that. Shane's got now, and honestly, the best moment of his career for me was when he blew out his quad at WrestleMania. That was a real highlight for me.
Thank you.
Me too.
So I believe that the most misunderstood wrestler of all time is Andre the Giant, and I believe it's Dave Meltzer's fault.
Okay.
And look, preface this, I really enjoy Dave Meltzer. I think he's a uniquely charming pundit. He's low-key extremely hilarious, and through his work and through his documentation of wrestling history and, you know, star ratings and stuff, he has done more to influence my tastes and open my eyes to new styles of wrestling than anyone else. So I would not be the wrestling fan that I am today with an appreciation of multiple different styles and countries and eras and all of this stuff, if not for Dave Meltzer. So full appreciation for that man. The problem with it is that Dave Meltzer has spent 40 years or so telling you that Andre the Giant's most famous match against Hulk Hogan is an irredeemable sack of trash, which, when you're a young, impressionable wrestling fan, and you're going looking through the annals of history for these historic, significant landmark tentpole moments, you might just take as fact rather than applying a bit of scrutiny and delving into it for yourself. So look, it's a hard sell of a match in 2025, right? I'm not going to sit here and go, actually, it was 5 stars because blah, 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 blah. It's very difficult to go back, and it's very difficult to look at older matches out of context and appreciate them. Sometimes if you're looking to get into an art form, it's better to start with something contemporary, right? So like if someone's looking to get into rap music, I wouldn't say go and start with the Ultramagnetic MCs because it's very basic and it's blah, 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 blah. Same if you're trying to get into punk rock, don't listen to SSD first, maybe try Rancid or something like that. With Andre Hogan, it is such, it's a bear hug and a slam of a match, right? But at the same time, it's exactly what it needed to be in that singular moment. And the problem is, because critics such as Dave, and Dave as a critic has always favoured action. He's always had an extreme bias towards the most cutting edge, pulse pounding in-ring action. One of his most favourite wrestlers of all time is Manami Toyota, who kind of embodies that. This match is not that, and as a result, because it's so famous and because it's such a big event, Andre now has been typecast as big lumbering broken old stiff, which he was towards the end of his career, but to reduce his legacy to that, to reduce his legacy to just a guy that Hogan had to slam in a big stadium who couldn't walk around and do anything, does the man a great disservice. He has a body of really acclaimed work, a lot of which I haven't fully explored myself, against people like Killer Khan and Antonio Inoki, and lots of stuff going back to the 70s and the 80s. But I would encourage anyone watching this to understand what I mean fully when I say he's misunderstood, to go and watch 2 matches from 1981, number 1 being his clash with Stan Hansen, which is like, it's maybe 11 minutes, but it's the most compelling, reckless, out of control kaiju fight you will ever see. And also, from 1981, his match against Hulk Hogan, when Hulk Hogan was a heel, and Andre's playing the babyface, it's a completely different dynamic. And you watch this big monster cell, and like there's a real charm to watching Andre do things like mat work because he's so humongous. It looks like he's a troll trying to rip your limb off. You know, he's not doing a Zack Sabre Jr. nice little twisty turn. He's, well, I've got your finger now. What am I going to do with that? He is an absolute lug who's going to tear your limb off. I think that exploring Andre is an eye-opening experience for anyone like me who grew up taking the most prominent critic in wrestling history's word as gospel and assuming that because his most famous match is bad, everything must be bad. Don't always listen to Dave Meltzer, do your own homework.
The answer to the question, who is the most misunderstood wrestler ever, it has to be Christian Cage. Well, or at least it has to be for me, personally, because though he has never been misunderstood really by the fans have always seen him and gone, there's a genius right there, there is a wrestling genius, a mastermind within this business who can craft incredible matches, he can make anybody that he's in the ring with look like $1,000,000, and who really understands his characters, who he's playing. He knows how to make you like laugh, knows how to make you love him, despise him. He just has a full grasp whenever he really gets the chance to sink his teeth into a character. He just knows, he understands what he's doing there. But for a big old spell in his career, he was working under a man who didn't like him, didn't understand him, completely just didn't know what he had on his hands with Christian Cage. and that man was Vince McMahon, obviously. And it's all out there on the internet that, like, it's no secret this. He did not like Christian for whatever reason. Maybe, as it has been like suggested in the past, it was because he just wasn't built like a main event star, whatever the hell that means. Like, he just wasn't jammed full of muscles, and he wasn't jacked. Like that means that automatically he can't be considered as a main event, like, top level babyface or a heel, apparently, in Vince's mind. Just for Christian in particular, not Rey Mysterio, not Chris Jericho, not these people. No. They're fine. They can be the physiques they are, but Christian, no, didn't like it. So he just never was trusted. He was never really just seen and given that space or freedom to have a go as like a top level villain or a top heel, somebody that didn't feel secondary, somebody that felt like the focus on your Raws or your SmackDowns. He never was. Every time he got a little bit close, he was just undermined, or just they'd throw somebody else into a match just to kind of secure it and shore it up because they didn't fully trust him. And it was really disheartening for fans of Christian, and it was clearly disheartening for Christian himself, and that's why eventually he was just like, I've had enough of this, I'm going to go to TNA. He showed exactly what he was capable of there as a babyface, a heel, whatever it is. He was given that freedom, he was trusted, and yeah, we got some of the best work of his entire career there. And then he thought, you know what, I'm going to come back to WWE, I'll show them, they've seen what I can do now, I'll come back and I'll do that there. But again, wasn't trusted. He got the World Championship, yeah, he had that little run, he had some great matches with Randy Orton again, because Christian just knows how to make these incredible in between the rope action beats. I think they're called matches. I don't know why we did that big long-winded version of it, but okay. He did that. He was still able to do that, but then still he was never just seen as a big-time player. So he was like, all right, cool. When he eventually had to take some time away and obviously retire really from in-ring action, when he did come back, he had that little Royal Rumble appearance in WWE, and then he had that chance. He seemingly had that opportunity there to come back to WWE or try something different. And fair play to Christian, he sat there anyway, and now I've been misunderstood within this company for way too long. I'm not doing it. I'm going to go and try something different. I'm going to go to AEW, have a bit more creative freedom, and just show everyone exactly what I can do when I'm just given that platform to just play a character that I believe in, and for somebody that believes in him, because Tony Khan clearly believes in him and just wants him to flourish and just be exactly a performer that he clearly knows that he could be, and what Christian's always known he could be. And that's why we've got something like the Patriarch now. That's all Christian, that's all his mind. He just knows how to push your buttons and just get those vile, toxic reactions thrown at him every time he's there in front of camera. And he's clearly having the time of his life, and we're having the time of our lives watching him do his thing. And it's great. It's just great seeing him in a company that finally understands him, when for so long he was within or inside of one that didn't. It clearly misunderstood him. And yeah, that's why he's my most misunderstood wrestler ever.
Right, first things first, at the end of last year, we did one of these chatty videos about people we'd like to see make a WWE return in 2025, and I went with X-Pac, Shawn Walman, for a Royal Rumble appearance, and who knows, maybe a match or two down the line. And now I would like to offer up Shawn Walman for this video as well. Hey, I'm quite a fan. Now, for some people, when they think of Waltman, they lazily throw out that term X-Pac heat, which that was from the time after DX, that was basically DX was no longer a thing, Triple H had moved on, Road Dogg had moved on as a singles act, and then later with K Quick. Billy Gunn was looked at for a big singles push, but there'd be the injuries, then he was rebranded as The One. Billy Gunn. Chyna was doing her own thing, we ended up with Eddie Guerrero for a spell, and X-Pac, well, X-Pac was just left to somewhat flounder, eventually starting his own X-Factor faction, which, while not the greatest of factions, did have a banger of an entrance theme. I will stand by that to my dying day. As for X-Pac heat, that was a case of fans booing X-Pac not because of his heel work, but more because they just weren't all that interested in him as a performer or how he was being used back then. But don't get it wrong, Shawn Walman was a special talent who was somewhat of a revolutionary, dare I say it. I mean, prior to him turning up in the WWF in 1993 as the Kid, the Lightning Kid, the Kamikaze Kid, the settling as the 1-2-3 Kid, by that point, North American wrestling fans had rarely, on a mainstream level, if ever, seen the sort of offense that high-flying ultimate underdog that Shawn Walman brought to the table. I mean, seeing the 1-2-3 Kid hit his trademark moonsault, it cannot be understated how big a deal that was back then. That was the sort of thing you just did not see in mainstream wrestling at that point in time. Sure, moonsaults and the like, they're all clearly commonplace these days, but back then, In a platform such as the WWF, you didn't really have wrestlers who did the things that Shawn Walman was doing. That 1, 2, 3 kid gimmick, yes, of course, that could only take Shawn Walman so far. Changes would need to be made to his persona. There was the heel 1, 2, 3 kid with the $1 Million Corporation. We had 6 in WCW, and then we got X-Pac upon his return to WWF in 1998. But throughout it all, Shawn Walman just regularly put on great performances, and the work he did back then, particularly during that first WWF run, that paved the way for so many wrestlers down the line. So many wrestlers who have now incorporated that work, that similar style, who were inspired and influenced by what Shawn Walman was doing. Now, I'm not saying X-Pac was some top tier main event wrestler, but the amount of disrespect that gets put on his name by some people is just absolutely ridiculous, man. It grinds my gears. Give that man his flowers. Let's not forget how innovative he was for his time. And also, props have to be given for how Shawn Walman has turned his life around, with him coming across as the nicest dude in interviews and on his social media, living his best life, doing great work for animals and charities, spreading plenty of positivity, and who knows, maybe we do get one more WWE match from Walman by the time all is said and done. It's just absolutely crazy to think it's somehow approaching 23 years since he last wrestled in a WWE ring. But either way, for me, Shawn Walman is just such a misunderstood talent, especially from those people not around to see him during those 1, 2, 3 kid days.
I'm glad you asked. It is Kenny Omega, and I'm not just saying that, right? I understand, and I hate kind of like responding to this because it's a pretty bad faith complaint, but maybe it isn't. There's a lot of people in good faith or otherwise who lambast AEW and lament AEW for not doing enough sports-oriented storytelling. They did all along, and Kenny Omega was the one doing it, and a lot of swine just didn't seem to get that, right? I'm going to use 2 examples away from, his really sort of unique approach to selling, where he will simply just take a knock, and then as athletes do, like in football matches all the time, simply recover. You don't have to take 5, kicks to your leg and go, all right, that's his leg broken for the whole match. He has a different, layered, sports-oriented approach to selling, but away from that, 2 specific examples in AEW, how he tried to use the athlete's mindset to tell stories. The first example was his relationship with Hangman Page, and how he would sort of neg him, peck at his psyche, sort of confirm to Hangman Page that all of his anxieties, that you're not quite elite. Now, if you listen to an elite footballer from a different era talk about someone who's now considered one of their peers, or someone who's alongside them in that world-class bracket, or it could be a basketball star. I've actually heard or read interviews with Jordan talking about LeBron in such a way. The elder statesman, who's no longer in the news cycle because he's retired, will get asked about their sort of contemporary, or sort of their new sort of peer, and they'll always, without exception, be very petty, defensive, and I want to swear on the video, C-U-N-T-Y about this person and say, yeah, they're good. It's yeah, quite good. Yeah, I mean, it's not as good as me. Is that what you're trying to imply there? They're always consider they're meant to be the most alpha personalities ever. They will always say, oh yeah, good. I mean, they're not me though. And they hate the accusation that anyone could be on their level at all, because they have dedicated their entire life to being at that level, and they don't want that to be challenged. Sports people, high level athletes, are total bitches, and that's what Kenny Omega's character was trying to portray to Hangman Page the whole time. If you watch their interplay way back when, even though it was Hangman Page ingeniously who was winning the matches for them, it was always Kenny going, yeah, it's kind of me, it's kind of me, it's kind of me. Another thing, and he did this to the detriment of his own star power to tell, yes, it was sort of a rushed version of it, but to the detriment of his own star power and this idea that you just come back and you're a star again, he tried to really incorporate some sports-based psychology in his return ahead of All Out 2022. Now, it didn't do well in the ratings compared to his Bell Collector run in 2021, which absolutely did, because wrestling fans gravitate towards big stars and not actual sports-oriented storytelling, which actually doesn't really work as much as we'd all like to see it. Well, not all of us, evidently. Is that he came back, he had the sort of the compression vest, and then that was removed, and it was all a bit quick, but it was fine. The kinesio tape, he didn't tan himself, with the idea being that when he's back fully formed at the pay-per-view and he's bronzed and he's got the torso out and the tapes off that he's fully formed Kenny Omega. He did that to the detriment of his own star power, and people just thought, his selling was so good in those first matches when he was just gently on the comeback that people thought, he could be broken. That's why you don't get sports-oriented stories. It's because Kenny Omega tried to do it and it didn't work, and it's all your fault. I blame you.
Michael Hampler, who's the most misunderstood wrestler ever?
Shawn Michaels. And it's not to say that he isn't beloved, which I think is what people should think of Shawn Michaels. It's not to say that he isn't considered a legend, at least within WWE, but in sort of the wider pro wrestling landscape. But I do genuinely believe that too many people celebrate for me the wrong Shawn Michaels. I want to talk about my Shawn Michaels. I want to talk about Shawn Michaels, who was under the influence of loads and loads and loads of 90s based things because he was better in the 90s.
Okay.
But like far better, far better. When people say now, like that's Shawn Michaels' influence, it's this like negative, it's this criticism of people that like stare at their hands too much or are too obsessed with finding the hard camera rather than just finding the emotions of the audience. It's the idea that you're supposed to turn everything into some Shakespearean drama rather than simply just get out there and wrestle. But that was only one part of Shawn Michaels' incredible career. And yes, it did come to dominate that 2002 to 2010 period because it was something that not everybody was doing, and certainly was something that Shawn Michaels helped popularise in that period that I think a lot of people then within NXT had drilled into them and trained into them. But even Shawn Michaels, when talking about him being an angry young man or talking about the mistakes he made in the 1990s, should be even prouder of that tape, even prouder of those matches, of everything that he was able to put together. Nobody, and I say this as a Britsman, nobody was doing what Shawn Michaels was doing in 1995 and 1996, certainly not in North America. A man that, again, did things to his body that I'm sure he regrets now, but as a result was able to do things to his body in the ring that were far more influential to generations of wrestlers than the ones that come through the NXT system now. The devotees of him that watched on DVDs and then wanted to be a wrestler because of the DX, like late 2000s era Shawn Michaels, whatever. There was a Shawn Michaels that took risks, that took chances, that genuinely wanted to steal the show just so he could say F off to his friends and colleagues, that was willing to bury his best mate in the main event of WrestleMania because he wanted it more, and you kind of couldn't hate that hateability because thankfully I didn't have to work with him. All I had to do was watch. I don't want people that made as many lives miserable as Shawn Michaels did in the locker room, but I want the Shawn Michaels that made them competitive. The idea that if you're not on his level, get the hell out of here. I kind of miss that in North American locker rooms, and it happened because of Shawn's talent, not just because he was kind of a piece of trash. I want every wrestler, when they wake up in the morning, to look in the mirror, and hopefully not with the back injury and the outside of the ring demons and influences that Shawn Michaels had as he walked that aisle in 1998, and I want them to say, "Who's the fucking man?" And I want them to mean it because it was when the business was better.